Hello, everyone, and welcome to the San Francisco Historical Society. We are streaming live tonight. The topic of tonight's presentation is the invention of the cable car. This event is one of many we're doing to help celebrate the anniversary of the cable car. So I thank you all for coming. This has got to be a record crowd in here. It's absolutely awesome. I think we have 64 people here and about 100 watching from home. So that's really great. As you can see, especially those of you who have come to our presentations before, we're in the process of trying to upgrade what we do and upgrade the presentations, the quality of them, the quality of the broadcast and the live stream. We've come a long way thanks to Matt and Al. There's one thing that is sort of lagging behind, and that is our projector, which is sort of like an old classroom projector. So we have a goal tonight, and that is to invite you all to help us get a new one. If everyone here and at home could give us $10 to $20, we would have enough for a fantastic projector to sort of up our experience and make these presentations better and better for you who are here in person and people who are at home. So I make that little appeal to you. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce John Freeman, the head of our program committee, and he will introduce Taryn. Thank you.
I also welcome you and am thrilled at this audience, at the size of this audience and the interest in our topic. So Taryn Edwards, some of you remember her from the Mechanics Institute. She was there 15 and a half years. And one of the things that she's going to talk about is not the mechanics or the construction or any other part of the cable car system. She's going to talk about the man and his role in a lot of things in San Francisco at his time, one of which was the Mechanics Institute in the San Francisco Public Library. But so we're going to hear a little different view of the cable car story. We're celebrating 150 years, but we're also celebrating the man who made it possible. All right. We've got the rest of the mechanics of how we do our programs. So without further ado, I'm going to give you Taryn Edwards, who is our expert on the person, as opposed to she doesn't remember where all the routes went. She doesn't know the wood blocks that kept you from slipping and sliding, but she does know about a person, and this person is who we're introducing tonight.
Hey, all right. Thank you for having me today. And I'm glad to see so many familiar faces from my old employer, Mechanics Institute, and Andrew Hallidie's passion project as well. Yes, I'm going to tell you a lot about Andrew Smith Hallidie and his thinking behind the development of the cable car. I have been working on his life since 2012. Can't believe how long ago that is. I'm very, very, very slowly working on a book about his life, or at least a chunk of research that I publish in some respect someday. So Hallidie is famous for developing the San Francisco cable car, but my particular interest in him stems from his role in the development of libraries and educational institutions throughout California. I myself am a librarian, and I'm personally fascinated with the way his mind worked. And one of his primary gifts was the ability to devise solutions when facing an impossibility. All right, so I can't wait till you get your new projector because I have some beautiful pictures. I promise to come back. All right, so the cable car is just one of Hallidie's many achievements that has made the San Francisco Bay Area the place we love and call home. But the cable car is a very complicated topic. The first cable car, as we know them, came into service in August of 1873. So this is its 150th anniversary. And there's a whole bunch of events planned by the city and other wonderful groups like the San Francisco Historical Society, Market Street Railway, to help promote the anniversary. So do check out sfcablecars.org. All right, so eventually there would be over a dozen cable car lines by 1906 that were operated by several companies completely unaffiliated with Hallidie and using technologies that he had nothing to do with. Since we don't have all night, I have limited this talk to the genesis of the cable car and the evolution of the idea in Hallidie's mind, thus the thinking behind the cable car. All right. As Hallidie himself would admit, the impetus to build the cable car came to him on a rainy day, winter's day in 1869, when he was walking up Jackson Street between Kearny and Grant. The story goes that there he witnessed a terrible accident. A team of horses were pulling a streetcar up the grade, and as they approached the summit, the intersection, one of the horses slipped on the wet cobblestones, and the driver, so the horse slips, the car starts to go down, the driver applies the brake so hard that it gets ripped out of the carriage of the car, and the entire car slides down the hill, taking all the passengers, the horses, down with it. Of course, the horses are dragged pretty much to their death over the pavement, and then the car comes to the rest at the end of the hill. The horses are mutilated and killed for the most part. Passengers are terrified. It was pretty much a terrific, awful accident. But it is a story. You will learn by listening to me. Hallidie, however, had been turning over the idea of how to use his products and his inventions for transport long before 1869. In fact, his whole life had prepared him for the cable car adventure. Now, Hallidie was an inventor by birth. In fact, he was a civic leader, and above all, he was a businessman. And he knew that in order to sell a product, you have to have a great story. Okay. So I'll leave you on that, and now I'm going to tell you about the man. So Hallidie's life was crammed with invention, near-death experiences, and really selfless service to the causes that he cared about. He was a tireless supporter of San Francisco's industrial and educational interests. He was a firm believer in women's educational rights and a champion of working-class children. By the end of his life in 1900, he was California's premier wire rope manufacturer, the inventor of really a game-changing mode of transportation, the cable car, and also the leader of the state's manufacturing endeavors and a founder of many of the organizations that we consider essential to the life that we enjoy here in the Bay Area. All right, so things are going to get complicated. Hallidie was born with a different name. Andrew Hallidie Smith was his birth name. He was born on March 16th, 1834, but he changed his name about 1853 after coming to California. He never explained why, but I presume it was to differentiate himself from his father and all the other Andrew Smiths that were running around the gold fields in the 1850s. So our Andrew was the sixth child and fourth son of a civil engineer named Andrew Smith and his wife, Julianne Johnstone, who were both Scots living in London. They raised their family in Leicester Square on Princes Street in a building that served double duty as residence, wire rope factory, and a workshop that was rented out for other people to use. Kind of a WeWork for inventors. Now, our Andrew was named for this guy, Sir Andrew Hallidie, who was a kinsman of the Smith family. Dr. Hallidie was a trained physician. He trained at the University of Edinburgh and was a surgeon for the British Army. He served in the Napoleonic Wars and notably the Battle of Waterloo. He also helped establish King's College in London and was the royal physician for William IV and Queen Victoria. So his connection to the Smith family is a little bit tenuous, but it must have been strong because the Smiths would name 2 of their children after him. Our Andrew's father, Andrew Smith, was born in Dumfriesshire, Scotland, and his mother, Julianne Johnstone, was probably born in London, but hailed from the Lockerbie area, according to family lore. Andrew Smith came to England in his youth, late teens, and made a name for himself as an engineer. In his 20s, he worked at the Royal Dockyards in Woolwich in Kent, near London, working on engineering problems faced by the nautical industry. He rigged ships, he built steam engines, and he worked to resolve issues with boat propulsion. Let me underline that, propulsion. He's concerned about how to move things. Later in his 30s, Andrew Smith took over a window and door manufacturing firm on Princes Street in London, moved his family there, and then throughout the rest of his life, he took out scores of patents for a variety of technologies, including window and door hardware, boat propelling mechanisms, steam generators, lightning conductors. Those were hot things in the 1820s and 30s. A suspension bridge, and then later, curiously, a machine gun. Most importantly, he was the first person in the English-speaking world to patent the concept of wire rope, or cable, as we call it today. And this brings me to the first technology that the cable car uses, wire rope. Sorry about that. All right, so Andrew Smith, our Andrew Hallidie's father, claims to have started playing around with metal ropes in 1827 due to a problem with rats chewing on the pulleys of his patent metallic shutters. So this guy, he made window and door hardware, and he used pulleys for sash windows and also shutters. Now, the pulleys were made from catgut, which was a type of cord made from the intestines of large animals, ironically, not cats. Sheep, goats, horses, mules, donkeys, they all provided intestines to make catgut, but not cats. Probably because cat intestines are very small. Anyway, catgut was used for surgical ligatures, violin strings, tennis rackets, archery bows, and window and door mechanisms. So as the catgut of the window shutters got chewed by these rats, Smith cast about for something that was slim enough to fit into the channel of the shutter, and he had the idea to twist together a couple of wires as a replacement. He then would spend 4 years perfecting this method of using wires to replace his catgut. 4 years perfecting this method, and then he invented a machine that looked like this one to make this wire into a rope. And he modeled this machine after the similar machines that he used making rope ship rigging at the Royal Dockyards. So this image, an image of Smith's wire rope machine, I cannot find. This is an image of his arch enemy, Robert Newell. So I just want you to know, Newell and Smith were enemies. This was his principal competitor at the time. All right, so Andrew Smith takes out his first patent for wire rope in January of 1835, starting a line of work that the Smith family would pursue in London and in California for the next 60 years. But Andrew Smith didn't invent alone. His residence and place of business offered workshop space to other inventors. He was also heavily involved in the scientific community that blossomed in London at that time. He was a member of the local mechanics institutes, as well as the Royal Society of Arts and Royal Institution, and was in daily contact with some of the most exalted names in science at the time, including Marie Ampere, Michael Faraday, and James Marsh. The fellow on the far right, Augustus Siebe, he was one of the renters of workshop space at Andrew Smith's residence. And so I like to always include his picture. He was the inventor of the underwater diving helmet. All right, so meanwhile, in the 1830s, the London and Blackwall Railway was organizing with George Stephenson as the engineer. And Stephenson decided to propel his rail cars with cables hauled from stationary steam engines. This had been used successfully in Newcastle for an industrial rail line that serviced the coal mines of the region. And it's used today if you've ever taken the little train that goes from the the Coliseum BART station to the Oakland Airport. Basically, it's a stationary engine and cars that go out and then come back. So Andrew Smith's patent wire ropes were tested on the London and Blackwall Railway, but ultimately he lost that contract to a competitor, Mr. Newell, the guy whose machine I just showed a picture of. That started a rivalry that would last several years and ultimately resulted in bankruptcy. But Smith, however, despite the disappointment of losing this massive contract, continued to refine his wire rope and teach his sons how to make them. Unfortunately, as I said, wire rope was such a hot technology at the time. Mr. Smith was working on it, and several other inventors were experimenting with the concept at the same time. So this bred a number of rather wicked patent lawsuits, and Andrew Smith eventually went bankrupt at the end of 1848. But Andrew Smith was the cat that always landed on his feet. Once his bankruptcy hearings were over, he had lined himself up a second career as chief engineer for John Charles Fremont at his estate in Mariposa, California. In order to sweeten the deal, Colonel Fremont granted Andrew Smith an unmarked grant of land on his estate in Mariposa. Andrew Smith quickly gathered a joint stock company, which was the hot thing to do back then, start up a company called the Golden Mountain Mining Company. And he and a group of about 20 engineers and two of his sons left London to come to California. They landed in February of 1852. After a brutal trip across the Pacific, across the Atlantic on the steamship Pacific, they landed in New York, hopped a second ship to Panama. Then they had a harrowing trip across the isthmus and a long journey up the West Coast, eventually landing on my birthday, May 24th. I can never forget it, 1852 in San Francisco. All right, they didn't spend much time in the city. They immediately traveled to the gold fields, which was typical of your mining immigrant. What was there to do in San Francisco after all? Except buy some clothes and then head out to where the money was. They headed out to the American River. Actually, they headed out to Mariposa. Later, they went to the American River. But this is a wonderful picture. I hope it's clear for you because it shows you how crowded it was. Wall-to-wall people. Ultimately, mining didn't pan out for the Smith family. Often the case for immigrants hoping to strike it rich. You didn't laugh at my joke. I mean, it's not a joke, but to say it didn't pan out, I thought that was funny. All right, so Andrew Smith, his gold joint stock mining company didn't make any money. He was recalled back to London by the board of directors, highly embarrassing. He goes back home to London, but he leaves his teenage son, Andrew, to fend for himself. This is mid-1853, and this is the time when young Andrew decides, I'm not going to be Smith anymore. I'm going to be Andrew Smith Hallidie. So he changes his name. And as I said, my best guess is because he wanted to differentiate himself from Andrew Smith, the famous wire rope maker, and all the other Andrew Smiths. There are quite a few. So young Andrew Smith spent a lot of time on the American River, the Middle Fork especially, and this is where our story starts. So he kicks around the gold fields for a few years, and in the summer of 1856, he finds himself building a waterway for a quartz mill on the Middle Fork of the American River. The quartz was at the top of the hill, and the mill is at the bottom. So there's a track. His job was to build a track to help take the ore from the top of the hill down to the mill. The rope had to be 1,200 feet long, so it's a significant distance. The rope would only last 75 days, and so Hallidie proposes to his owners to make a rope out of wire. He's like, hey, my dad taught me how to do this. Trust me, you're going to save money. So the offer was accepted, and Hallidie improvised machinery using the metal from horseshoes that he just happened to find lying around the foothills. It boggles my mind that anyone could make a wire rope machine from horseshoes, but he did it. He ended up making 3 ropes, splicing them together to be approximately 1,200 feet long, and this rope was the first of its kind in the state. It would last 27 months, approximately the lifespan of 10 hemp ropes. So, of course, the mill owner was impressed and said, you're hired, young man, make more ropes. So with this success, Hallidie realized, I've got a market for my product. He abandons the gold field at this point. He takes his horseshoe-made machinery and brings it to San Francisco. He and a business partner named Mr. Thomas Bradford opened up a wire works in North Beach. Their first workshop was at Taylor Street between Chestnut and San Francisco. And this is the earliest known drawing that I could find of it. This is circa 1860. All right, business was very slow at first, but by 1861, Hallidie had enough capital to be advertising in over 30 newspapers up and down the West Coast, including British Columbia. If you've ever taken an ad out in the newspaper, you know how expensive it is. So this is impressive to me. This is an example of his advertisement. I couldn't fit the whole thing, but he included, his products included wire ropes for hoisting purposes, pump ropes, derrick guy ropes, ferry ropes, and ship standing rigging. And he also, at this time, started building bridges using wire. As I said earlier, his father had taken out a patent for a suspension bridge. So one can safely assume he young Hallidie paid close attention to that. Hallidie's first known bridge was actually a flume, which was a bridge for water. And he made that for a mining company on the American River in 1857. And that catapulted him into the bridge building business. His next bridge was over the Klamath River, near its confluence with the Trinity, so that's up north. And then he would build 7 more bridges at least over the next 3 years, mostly in the Sierra foothills. This picture is of Nevada City's bridge, and it's a typical Hallidie bridge because there are these triangular posts on the sides, and usually a sign right above. Here are those triangular posts again. This time they're clad with redwood, but let's go back. You can see it looks just like it. Is there a sign in this picture? No, it must be on the other side. Anyway, this is at Rattlesnake Bar over the American River. As I said, the triangular towers were kind of Hallidie's signature look to his bridges. So he became so famous as a bridge builder that in 1863, he'd be commissioned by Sir Joseph Trutch to build an enormous suspension bridge over the Fraser River. The bridge was along the Caribou Mountain Road, a wagon road, which was a new road digging right into the heart of the British Columbian wilderness. Hallidie faced, there was gold in those hills, I should say. That's why they wanted the bridge. Hallidie faced a lot of problems with the natives, issues bringing all the materials. It had to come from San Francisco, but eventually the bridge was completed in September of 1863. The bridge no longer stands, but there's another one in the exact same location, if you should want to go visit. All right, back to the cable car. So while Hallidie is building bridges and living the California dream, his older brothers were busy making names for themselves in the engineering world. Hallidie's eldest brother, William Smith, who was, I think, 8 years older, he took over a patent office and a companion magazine, the Artisan Engineering Journal. And this would be one of many mechanisms that Hallidie had for keeping apprised with patents and breaking technologies that were happening in Europe. Of course, he's going to subscribe to his brother's magazine. All right. So that is an image of the Artisan. Hallidie's second oldest brother, Archibald. I always laugh when I say that name. I don't know why. Archibald Smith took over their dad's wireworks in London. Now, Andrew Smith was still alive, but he had what I can only describe as a mental break. He never got over the fact that he lost his fortune coming to California. He didn't strike it rich, and he had a lot of problems with defending his patents. And so he kind of had a psychic break, and he moved to Scotland, back to his village, and there he died. But there were some embarrassing moments with the police, window breaking, other weird stuff. So Archibald takes over the family's manufacturing, wire rope manufacturing business, and happily starts building more machines to make wire rope. Building upon their dad's design, Archibald Smith took out patents for a new kind of flat wire rope and the machine to make it, which he displayed at the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts in 1858. Now, Archibald specialized in elevators and using wire rope to move things in homes, buildings, and mines. This is important because we've got a lot of mines in California and Nevada to talk about. Hallidie and his brothers maintained a robust personal communication, and they undoubtedly shared their thoughts on their current engineering projects. Meanwhile, at the same time, there's a silver rush going on in Nevada, and to get to the silver, you had to tunnel underground, an environment that requires elevators to move people down to get the ore and move the ore and people out. Now, elevators work best when they use a flat wire rope because round rope kinks and sometimes snaps when it's rolled onto a spool. And so Hallidie was like, Archibald's flat wire rope works great. I'm going to develop my own, though, and patent it here in California. So he starts his own flat wire rope business or flat wire rope product line. It hits his catalog in 1863 and very quickly becomes the industry standard throughout the Comstock lode. And as you can see from this map, which outlines all the different mines in the Comstock region, there was a huge market for Hallidie's wire rope. And here's a picture of that rope in use. It's as nearly as wide as that man's head. So what I want to illustrate here is that during the tail end of the 1850s and the whole of the 1860s, Hallidie is exposed to a variety of application of wire rope here in California, and through correspondence with his brothers and exposure to the professional literature, he's seeing what they're doing in other parts of the world. And Hallidie is especially interested in these technologies that involve the moving of people and objects. And here we are to the second technology that the cable car uses, the propulsion of vessels via an endless wire cable powered by an engine of some kind. All right, now to the really meaty stuff. So during the late 1860s, there was a rash of inventions surrounding the use of cable propulsion. A lot of people experimenting with this at the same time. In 1867, a man named Charles Harvey is in New York. He builds an experimental single-track, cable-powered, elevated railway, and it was called the One-Legged Railroad because of that single track and that single pole, single row of columns. But the cable was an endless cable, just like our cable cars use today. It was a loop of cable driven by a stationary engine that ran between the rails for the propulsion of the cars. It's very similar to what the cable cars would use 5 years later. The primary difference is that Harvey's patent called for the car to be secured to the cable by a sort of claw that would grip little loops woven into the cable. So the cable had these little things on the sides, and Harvey's car would grip onto them and then move. A little bit different than Hallidie's grip. So basically, the car was attached permanently to the cable, attached to these loops, and it would move with the cable rather than grabbing and releasing the cable, which is what Hallidie's car does. All right. Meanwhile, Hallidie becomes aware of another thing that he finds interesting. In 1867, Hallidie decided to go to England to examine mining, hoisting machinery in Liverpool. He also visited his folks and attended the Paris World Exposition in Paris. And there he closely examined what was going on, what was on display. One invention he paid very close attention to in Paris was the John Fowler patent steam plow, which used 2 engines and an endless wire cable between them that was picked up and released by a grip. So this is the key. Hallidie didn't care that it was a plow, but he thought that grip thing is really interesting. 2 things he liked about this grip. The endless wire cable provided the power to move the plow, and the grip grabbed and released the endless wire cable, basically stopping and starting the plow. So, this is the 3rd technology that the cable car uses, a grip that grabs the cable and releases it. Hallidie would patent his own improvement of Fowler's grip pulley in 1870. He actually says this in the patent document. This is an improvement on Fowler's grip. And so he would use this later to move the underground cable of the cable car. Meanwhile, another guy named Charles, in February of 1869, patents an endless wire ropeway in England. Hallidie reads about this, hears of it from his brothers, who may have seen it at the Institution of Civil Engineers. They possibly even sold Mr. Hodgson the wire to make this product. Or Hallidie saw the prototype when he visited in England the year before. But Hallidie sees this drawing, this invention, and says that is exactly what California needs to move ore across the mountainous regions that we enjoy here. All right, so we're going to back up a little bit. Meanwhile, the population of the states is booming. The depression, the pall that was cast upon the United States culturally by the Civil War is lifting. The entire nation is becoming interconnected with railroads in one form or another. San Francisco wants to get in on that. In 1870, the Board of Supervisors starts to sell franchises to construct railroad tracks for passenger travel. They want to see the transport in the city be better, and so they start selling opportunities for businesses to build their own railroads. One is taken out in September by a group of gentlemen, the ringleader of whom was Benjamin Sherman Brooks. Because he took out the franchise, some people say, well, he must have invented the cable car or had that in his mind. He was an attorney who specialized in land issues. He owned several franchises in the city. He was hoping to cash in on evolving railroad technology and how it would affect real estate prices. Because if you're near transit, your property's worth more. He probably didn't know anything about engineering. He was no inventor. He was an investor. So he and his gang take out the franchise that Hallidie would eventually buy. Brooks's railway franchise was not specified as a cable railway yet, and that wouldn't happen until a little bit after Hallidie purchases it. But Hallidie bought it from Brooks in the summer of 1872. Meanwhile, Hallidie is improving upon that Charles Hodgson's ropeway. He patents his own version of it, and he calls it the Hallidie Endless Wire Ropeway. And that happened in January of 1871. This invention puts all 3 technologies that I discussed into action. The wire rope in an endless loop that's powered by an engine. The wire rope fashioned into an endless loop, the engine, and the gripping mechanism that stops and starts the cars. The only thing that's different is that this is above ground. This ropeway allowed for transport of ore across all kinds of terrain in California and Nevada, very similar to a modern-day ski lift. At this time, while Hallidie is working on this invention, Hallidie writes that he had California Street surveyed, the hilly part, in 1870. He notes this he says he did this in the Sacramento Record, and that he intended to run passengers. He intended to build this basically on California Street and run people, transport people above ground, just like this. I can't picture that, can you? California Street. But you can see Hallidie's already thinking, how do I move people in San Francisco? How can I take my inventions and make transport better? All right, so he sees this franchise taken out by Brooks. He buys it, and he starts up his own company, the Clay Street Railroad, which was incorporated in August of 1872. The aim was to construct a street railroad, not yet a cable railway, up Clay Street Hill. It was to be powered by a stationary engine and then continue north through several blocks using horsepower. So he's still not sure that he can move people up those super steep hills. And he still was not certain about putting the cable underground. All right, but let me see here. I can tell he was thinking about it because he made an announcement to the members of the Mechanics Institute. He complains about all the telegraph wires and all the power lines that are above ground, and he brags about how wonderful it was back in Europe where they put things underground. And he also waxes on about the European transit systems that he enjoyed while in Europe for the World's Fair. Okay, so we are getting close to time. Hallidie shares his business plans with two gentlemen that he knew at the Mechanics Institute, Joseph Britton. Some of his lithographs are undoubtedly on the walls of this museum, and Henry Davis, who was a sheriff, county sheriff at the time. Henry Davis also happened to be the president of the National Gold Bank and Trust. So that's the thing to remember. Be friends with presidents of banks. And Hallidie followed that rule very carefully because he needed serious cash in order to make his dream come true. The public thought he was crazy. And so very few people purchased stock in his idea. And so he ended up turning to another friend, a paper manufacturer, who also was involved with the First National Gold Bank. And Moffett agrees to match the funds. If Hallidie could raise $30,000, he would pay $30,000. So Hallidie's already feeling pretty good. And then he made friends with yet another banker, Mr. Ephraim Burr, who gave him $30,000 also. So bankers run in packs of 3. I encourage you to find your 3. All right, so he's got the funding in place. Construction begins in June of 1873. There are very serious obstacles. Water mains, gas mains had to be removed. They used California redwood to build the first conduit that the cable would pass through. The cable he used for the cable car was the same that he used for his endless wire ropeway. This was convenient. You didn't have to use a totally different product. It was a steel cable that had 6 strands and 19 wires each. It was 3 inches in width. For those of you that love statistics, it was 11,000 feet long, and it was fashioned into an endless loop. The total outlay was $100,000. In 1873 money, I can only imagine. And the construction to put this together was 60 days. So they worked quickly. Now, the cars for the original cable car were very simple. They were pretty identical to what a horse car looked like at the time. The passenger car trailed behind the dummy, which was the car with the grip. Nobody rode in that, just the grip man. And Hallidie's grip, you can see, is quite a bit different from the grip used today. It was like a wheel about the size of a pizza that you turned in order to grip and release the car. It was called the screw grip. All right, and then here is a view. I don't know why I have this slide. This isn't supposed to be here. But this is a view of the cable car, original cable car, on display at the Chicago World's Fair a bit later. All right, at midnight, technically on August 2nd, the boilers that powered the steam engines in the powerhouse at Leavenworth and Clay, they were fired up. At 5 a.m. at the top of Clay and Jones, a group of small engineers gathered to ride down the hill. And the story goes that the grip man, reportedly an old locomotive engineer, looked down that steep hill of clay and said, "No way," lost his nerve. But Hallidie was so confident, he just jumped into the car and took it all the way down, straight into the fog, turned it around on its turntable, and then came back up the summit, proving that his invention was a success. And it was. It began to serve passengers the next month. Now, my favorite part. This is a staged photo of the passenger cable car. The man in front is in the stovepipe hat is Hallidie himself. He was young at one time. When I started my research into his life, I only saw old photos of him, but he was young and handsome when the cable car was being invented. The lady sitting right next to him is his wife, Martha. She looks weird because she has a veil over her face. So she was quite beautiful, but I'm not seeing it in this picture. She was only about 25. The man in the middle with the white hair looking kind of confused, I believe that is the paper manufacturer / banker, James Moffett. And the man sitting behind them, I believe, is Ephraim Burr. These were two of the Endeavor's biggest financial backers. So when the press come, who do you take pictures with but your financial backers, your angel investors? All right, so the achievement of the cable car, as you probably can agree, can really not be overstated. It came just at the right time, just before the electrification of streetcars happened, but at a time when the city was expanding and everyone wanted to cash in on railroad technology. And really in San Francisco, the only place to go was up the hill. All the usable land was taken. All right, here's one of those old photos. Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Hallidie himself. While he was perfecting these inventions, he found the time to fall in love with a young lady named Martha Woods. He probably met her because her dad was a carpenter. And I bet you the carpenter, her dad, somehow worked with Hallidie. By all accounts, they had a very happy marriage. And these are some pictures that they took together in their later years. By the end of his life, Hallidie would see his cable car technology proliferate to nearly a dozen lines, run by several different companies. Unfortunately, due to several patent lawsuits and fraud from his business partners, when Hallidie died in 1900, he left his family in very poor financial shape. His wife, Martha, faced a number of legal challenges to Hallidie's patents, and she was forced to sell her house in San Francisco, her summer house, which is where they are here, in Portola Valley, right by Crystal Springs Reservoir. And when Hallidie passed away in April 24th of 1900, he had suffered for years from heart failure. congestive heart failure. But here they are in Portola Valley, living, having a nice afternoon. Hallidie's in the middle with the dog at his feet. His wife, Martha, is in the striped blouse right behind him. They had no natural children, but they practically raised their niece, Florence, who is seated on the steps behind Hallidie. And they had a little boy in their family that they adopted from infancy, and his name was Andrew Hallidie Brown. Mrs. Hallidie would outlive her husband by 37 years. She had a very hard life after he passed. He passed away, and within a year, her mother died, and that's her mother, and her baby, little Andrew Hallidie Brown. So she had a really hard time. And many letters from her from that time are just heartbreaking to read. All right, last but not least, this wonderful portrait can be seen at the Mechanics Institute on the 3rd floor. It was painted by a family friend and was a great comfort to Martha. It sat in her room until her death in 1937. Go take a look at it. The frame is gold. And it's one of the best portraits of him because it was painted during his lifetime, unlike those other portraits which were painted after he died. All right, now, last but not least, let me plug the San Francisco Cable Car Museum. It is the best free museum you will see in the region, except maybe the Maritime. I like that one too. But it is I believe the Cable Car Museum is now closed on Mondays. It used to be open 7 days a week. Anyway, thank you. I know I ran over time, but I hope that you enjoyed the story.
Nice job.
Thank you.